we really try and get inside the mind of our customers because they are the lifeblood of everything that we do.
Okay, welcome back to the Marketing Playbook, presented by Details Interactive. Here you'll take away 3 game-winning marketing plays every episode to take back to your team. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and my career has been focused on direct-to-consumer marketing, direct mail, physical retail, and digital commerce. This is episode number 38, and today's guest is Nate Checketts. Nate is the co-founder and CEO of Rhone, a men's lifestyle apparel brand. Before we get started, a quick thank you, as always, to Max Branstetter of the Wow Business Growth Podcast for producing this episode. You can reach him at max@maxpodcasting.com to help bring your podcast to life. Let's open the playbook. Ready, break. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Marketing Playbook Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Nate Checketts, the co-founder and CEO of Rhone, a men's performance lifestyle brand founded in 2014. Prior to Rhone, Nate worked for and consulted with some of the biggest technology and entertainment properties in the world, including Cisco, the National Football League, Legends, FanVision, and Sport Radar. Nate's also an avid entrepreneur who founded and launched 4 companies before the age of 30, including Rhone and Manja Technologies, whose patents were later acquired by the San Francisco 49ers. In 2020, Nate was selected by the Sports Business Journal to their 2020 list of 40 leaders under 40. In addition to Rhone, Nate also serves as chairman of the board to Beyond Type 1, a nonprofit dedicated to the community of those with type 1 diabetes. Nate graduated from Brigham Young University with a BA in finance. Nate, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining. I really appreciate it. We're recording this at the end of May. Seemingly the world is getting back to some sense of normalcy. How are you and your family doing?
We're doing great. Thanks for asking. In fact, I'm in my office today, and because of the new CDC guidelines, we're allowing people to come back in, and if they're vaccinated, they don't have to wear masks, which has been great. Still optional for people to come in, but it does feel like really within the last week or two, the world has started to reopen back up in a big way.
Well, that's great. I'm glad that you guys are doing well. We like to start these shows kind of setting the table for folks that may not know you, may not know your background. Perhaps a quick overview of your where you grew up. I know you came from a big family. Come from a big family. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, but despite that, have not become a Boston sports fan, much to my own chagrin, because they've been quite good over the course of my lifetime. But we quickly moved to Salt Lake when I was about 2.5, moved to Connecticut when I was about 8 years old, and mostly grew up in the Northeast. And yeah, come from a big family. There's 6 kids. I'm the third of 6, 4 boys, 2 girls, and I just have the best parents in the world, and have great siblings who are still my closest friends. So lots of things we could go into on the growing up years, but that's a very high level.
So you mentioned your parents. I certainly don't know either of your parents. I know of your dad. I'm a born and bred New Yorker. I live in New Jersey now. I'm a big Knicks and Rangers fan. My son lives in Hoboken. He's 27 now, and grew up a huge Knicks fan in the years that your dad was, I guess, general manager and then ultimately president. And maybe you'll tell us about your dad briefly, because I think that's a really fun part of your story.
My dad was a sports executive for the majority of his career. He started at Bain and Company, and when he was there, Bill Bain was looking to buy the Boston Celtics, and my dad had played college basketball. Not many consultants have played college basketball, and I think he was the only one at Bain. And so he got assigned to put a valuation on the Celtics to understand what they were worth, what Bill should be willing to pay. And in that process, he met with the then deputy commissioner, a man by the name of David Stern. And they built a great relationship. And Mr. Stern could not believe that he was from the small town of Bountiful, Utah. And at the time, the Utah Jazz were about $10 million in debt. They were owned by a guy named Sam Battistone. they were not doing well. They weren't very well received in a city, in a town where people loved college sports. BYU, University of Utah, football and basketball were everything in the state of Utah, and the Jazz just were not doing very well. But Mr. Stern was impressed and introduced my dad to Sam Battistone, and Sam ended up hiring him at the ripe old age of 28 to become the general manager of the Utah Jazz. And I think still to this day, he's the youngest NBA general manager in history. He was kind of like the Theo Epstein of that era for basketball. And it was amazing to grow up that way. So he was with the Jazz for 6 or 7 years, and then left to go run NBA International in New York. And after being at the league offices for a little over a year, the Garden tapped him to come in and be the president of the Knicks, and then eventually the president of the Garden. Could not ask for a more fortunate way to grow up and attend so many sports games, and especially because the Garden was just rocking during the 90s. I mean, the Rangers were good. They won the Stanley Cup in 94. The Knicks were good. They made the NBA Finals twice, Eastern Conference Finals a couple times. Just great rivalries. Like they were always in the playoffs. I mean, what I was telling my son last night is like, this is the first time I've been excited about a Knicks potential playoff run in 20 years. I think they've been to the playoffs. He left in 2001. I'm not saying this is because of him, or it's just kind of the timeline, but he's been gone for 20 years. I think they've made the playoffs twice since then, and maybe won one playoff series.
Yeah, their last win was 2013.
Yeah, so it's just pretty incredible. The decade, the kind of 12 years that he was involved with that entity, and what they did and accomplished during that time, and obviously very much a team effort. But I always tell people to call a spade a spade. I attribute any success or good fortune I have to my parents, and the only mistake that people make is they don't give my mom nearly enough credit. But I was very fortunate, and still am fortunate, to my dad's the first person I call when I'm having a challenge, and we talk about how to handle things. So it's been a great blessing in my life.
Very nice. And when you talk to your dad, you can tell him that you talk to a big time Knicks and Ranger fan, that he brought many smiles to my face over the years. And I will also say, knowing that sports is, kind of a tough environment, I always had the perception that he did it with class and dignity and professionalism. That was something that's been missed perhaps at the Garden for a long time. So just thank him for me, if you don't mind.
Sure. That's kind of you to say.
Tell us, you went to BYU, finance major, Manja Technologies, just high level. What was that about?
Yeah. So really, when I was at school, I came back to New York for a summer internship, and I noticed that all of these analysts, consultants were using this new service. This was like 2005, called Seamless Web. And at the time, it was just a website. You could go and you could order food. It would be prepared. It would actually get faxed to the local restaurants, and they would either then deliver it to you, or you could go and pick it up. And I was like, this is amazing, but why wouldn't you be able to do this on your phone? So I came back and wrote a business plan for it. This is well before, there's so many services now. You've got DoorDash and Postmates and Grubhub and Seamless, which still exists, but now it's just called Seamless. And we built one of the first iPhone applications, and then we quickly decided, what, this is really, really hard to grow these two markets. You have to grow customers and you have to grow restaurants. And in order to attract restaurants, you have to have a big enough user base. And in order to attract users, you have to have a big enough base of restaurants to order from. We decided to pivot and focus on something that I knew growing up, which was sports arenas. Great thing about a sports arena or a stadium is you generally have one restaurant vendor there that's managing kind of all of the food and concession delivery. So you can set up one group, and then you have this targeted group of 15 to 60,000, depending on the stadium. And this was a user acquisition strategy that would then, give us the ability to turn it into opening up cities. We ended up signing up about 15 buildings, and we ran into a ton of issues around the technology side of it. Most of these stadiums and arenas were not prepared for the rise of the smartphone and how much data and bandwidth was being used. People couldn't download the application. We invented all of this interesting IP around natural language processing and back-end kitchen point of sale integration. It was so, oh my gosh, it was like one challenge after another, and really was not a big success by any stretch of the imagination. But what we had done is we had created some really interesting IP in the space. And the 49ers were in the process of building Levi Stadium. They wanted to be the most advanced, it's in the heart of Silicon Valley, the most advanced stadium in the world. And so they bought our IP, and I stayed on and consulted with them and helped them on some of their really impressive technology that they brought to the market there. So now you show up, they were the first stadium to accept e-tickets in a big way. You can see how long the line is of the restroom, give it kind of a green, yellow, red. You can get pickup or delivery of food and concessions. And certainly the connectivity in the building was really interesting. And so it was a great experience. And I deferred going to a well-paying job out of undergrad to go to this crazy entrepreneurial route, much to my parents' strong opposition. And yeah, it really kind of started me on this path of startups and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, the part of the premise of what we do at the marketing playbook here is we try to give people, a couple of takeaways that they can take back to their personal or business lives. So there's a good one for our listeners. Sometimes follow your heart, and not necessarily the more pragmatic approach. And in your case, it obviously did pretty well. It's funny you're talking about having connectivity in buildings. I remember back going into the Garden, and you could stand out on 7th Avenue. You could get all the bandwidth that you wanted. As soon as you stepped in that building, it was
Gone.
a dead zone. There was nothing.
Yeah.
You couldn't even you couldn't text even back then.
Well, and it was even worse than that, because you'd have buildings that were named the Verizon Center or AT&T,
Right.
and you'd get inside those buildings, and these buildings are named after these impressive connectivity services, and you still couldn't use it. The high mesh density wireless solutions that now exist were so nascent back in those days. But to your point of the takeaway, I don't think it's uncommon. In fact, I've seen it to be quite more common. When you have a parent who's had success and they've done something risky, they know how hard it is, and they don't want that for their children, because they're like, the amount of time, even when I was starting Rhone, my dad was like, the clothing business is such a hard, it is so hard. And the truth that I think I've found is every industry is really hard. I don't think there's an easy industry. It just doesn't exist. But you have to feel like it's the right thing. You have to fall in love with it. You have to be passionate about it. And then, yeah, you got to be willing to work through the fact that everything is a little bit challenging and hard. This idea that you're going to find some magic. Like, I love it when I hear people talk about crypto or NFTs now, or like, it's like printing money. I'm like, for right now, it's going to get harder, and there's going to be a lot of people that lose it. It's a zero-sum game. So it's just everything is challenging.
Good points. So you made the Manja move, and then ultimately you went on to the NFL to serve in a role there in biz dev. Tell us about that.
Yeah, kind of before starting Manja, over the course of the summers, my mom had kind of challenged me to help earn some of the money to pay for the sports camps that I wanted to attend to. My parents, even though my dad had been successful, they were very focused on, we always had hours of Saturday jobs every single week. I remember telling my friends, like, I can't come over, I got to finish my Saturday jobs. They're like, what do you mean your Saturday jobs? Like, I grew up in New Canaan, Connecticut. It's not exactly like an industrial farm town or something. So they were just very focused on that. So in order to earn some money, I started mowing lawns. I decided to start a sports camp in my parents' backyard to teach kids how to play sports and like charge parents for it. I didn't even tell my parents about it. I just went and started handing flyers out at Little League games. And then parents were calling my mom and saying, like, is this happening? And, to my mom's credit, she was so great about it. She helped me get that off the ground. The camp ended up running for 8 years. My 2 younger brothers ran it. But in the process of that, I ended up meeting someone whose 2 sons came to the summer camp, a guy named Brian Rolap, who many now consider to be the heir apparent to Roger Goodell at the league. but at the time he was a very young executive at NBC. After this experience with Manja, I reached out to a lot of people, and Brian was one of the guys that I reached out to. And he asked me if I would consider interviewing for this one position because he thought it was a really interesting fit, given I had just spent the last 3 to 4 years focusing on the intersection between sports and technology. And I actually said, I don't think it's a good fit. I was starting to consult. I was making much better money and working about half the hours that I had in a startup. And I called my dad up and I said, hey, I had this really cool conversation. He invited me to interview. He's like, well, what did you say? I was like, I told him I didn't think it was a good fit. In more words and in a more tactful way, he basically told me it was a really dumb move and I should absolutely go take him up on it. So I flew out to New York, interviewed, and went through, I think, 4 or 5 rounds of interviews, and ultimately got a job to run the new business development strategy there. It was a great experience, worked with a lot of really, really smart and talented people and learned a lot in that process.
So interesting path to getting there, perhaps even more interesting than maybe some of the things that you were doing there. It's the path was great. So what was your charge?
As any sports league, you have sponsors, right? And the NFL has lots of sponsors, but Commissioner Goodell had charged the sponsorship group with doubling our sponsorship revenue by the year 2020. Kind of funny how that ended up happening. They were very focused on not becoming the NASCAR where you would see logos all over the field. My charge was to focus on the strategy. How are we going to double our revenue without doubling the number of clients? And so I started at the category list level. What we built out is I said, how are we making decisions on how we bring in a sponsor or a partner? And it's like, well, there's the airline category, there's the banking category. I just did like basic consulting work in the beginning where I asked lots and lots of questions. And I found that there was all this institutionalized approach to solving this problem. So if we have a banking partner, it's Wells Fargo, and then all of a sudden Wells Fargo doesn't want to pay the X $1 million fee that we're charging, then we're going to go and we're going to pitch Bank of America and Chase and these others until we get someone to bite on it. But the truth is that there were a lot of categories that were either too big, too expansive, and we could kind of slice them up finer and offer them to more partners, without kind of giving anything up. And there were categories that we could offer that were purely valuable from a business to business perspective, meaning we sold a sponsorship to a company called NetApp. And NetApp provides digital storage solutions for companies where you can kind of store all of your media. And what they wanted is they wanted to be able to tell people that they provided the solution for the NFL. And that's what was valuable to them. They didn't need a logo on the field. They needed a logo in their pitch deck when they're going and they're pitching big companies to say, guess who we handled this for? We handled it for the National Football League. And they wanted some, things like tickets to a game and unique experiences. So we could do that. We could increase the client size list without increasing the visibility exposure. And so by putting together a playbook, to use your word, it helped us get a lot more thoughtful. We took the technology. There's a category that was literally called the technology category. And that was like the first thing that I zeroed in. I was like, wait, there's one category for just everything technology related. They're like, yes, IBM has that deal. And I was like, and they're paying basically the same as somebody who sells like potato chips. They're like, yeah, that's right. Like that doesn't make any sense to anybody who knows anything about technology. There's about 5,000 categories just in this one category. Let's figure out what the right micro categories are and how we go out and we sell them. We ended up, I think, tripling the size of that category just by being a little bit more thoughtful about how we split it up. So there were, that's where I spent most of my time. And I really enjoyed working with our sales team who was going out and pitching it, and then working with our servicing team to service the existing sponsors.
Do you have a direct-to-consumer business? I enjoy connecting with guests on this podcast because it reminds me what I love to do, strategic and tactical consulting for businesses like yours. If you'd like to speak with me about your business and see how you can add a fresh set of eyes to your team, contact me at mark@detailsinteractive.com. Now let's get back to the marketing playbook. So your parents tell you that the apparel business is really tough, and you take all of your interest and information that you've learned, and you decide to start an apparel company called Rhone. You can see behind you, you have a sign, Rhone Cold Fusion, a breakthrough fabric technology. So tell us about Rhone and what your grand plan for it was when you started.
Yeah, I mean, really, it wasn't my vision. What happened is I was commuting into the city to work at the league. The hard thing for me is I was kind of miserable like 6 months in, and I had a lot of guilt about it because I knew I had a great job and I had a job that a lot of people coveted, and yet after working in a startup for 3 or 4 years, it's a very different environment to move to a corporate office. And so I remember kind of I had this aha moment where I was like, you know what? I really am. I'm just an entrepreneur. Like, I need the freedom, I need the flexibility to go and build something that didn't necessarily exist before. That's what drove me. And I remember I wrote specifically down, I want to build a brand that matters. And once I decided that, once I kind of like locked in that that's what I wanted to do, it made me change the way I like my ears perked up on certain things. So we'd be in meetings and I'd hear somebody who had done something once upon a time. And I'd say, I want to talk to that person. I want to learn more. The thing with Rhone is my brother-in-law had this idea, saw the market opportunity. He worked in kind of the hedge fund world, but his primary focus was on investing in retail. And so he said, there's this really weird gap in the market where when you compare men's and women's activewear, the majority of men's activewear is being serviced by these companies that distribute primarily through wholesale. So Nike, Reebok, Adidas, Under Armour, and they're within plus or minus 5% of each other in terms of their price index, how they typically price their products. They're all very competitively priced. But you have this new cohort of apparel makers that are primarily focused on women's. So 80+% of their sales are focused on women's. And their primary method of distribution is direct to consumer. And they're generally at a 40% price premium to these men's companies. This new cohort, directly distributed, focused on women's, at a price premium using premium fabrication, is not replicated on the men's side yet. And it feels like it's going to be. And so he and I just started spending time on it. And for me, it was initially just scratching this entrepreneurial itch. I actually thought I can still have a 401k. I can still go to the league office and feel really good about the work that I'm doing. And like, I could just do this on the side and feel like I'm kind of scratching that entrepreneurial itch. He approached me and asked me if I would go and run it. And I kind of resisted for a long, long time because I was so scared. I was nervous that I wasn't ready to go back and do it again. And eventually I just realized I was so much happier the time that I was spending on that than the time that I was spending on my day job. And I didn't feel good about that. And so I made the switch, and it's been quite the journey.
You must have been right about, the market assessment, because now there's, a number of players in your space that you compete with.
Yeah.
You started digitally native. What are the other channels that you sell in today?
We do have a wholesale channel. We sell to Nordstrom. We sell to Peloton. We're Peloton's biggest men's brand now. We sell to Equinox and have a great business there. Places like Barry's Boot Camp, and just great wholesale accounts that we're very, very selective about who we work with. But unlike most of these other businesses where wholesale was 80% of their business, for us, it's 15 to 20% of our business. And we also have our own retail stores, which we have 5 now. Just opened one in Boston on Newbury Street, and we have 3 in New York, and then 1 in Connecticut. We've got more on the way, but that's been fun. So we consider ourselves an omni-channel retailer, through multiple channels of distribution, which I think is really the future of commerce. You hear so much about these kind of pure digitally native brands who are only DTC, but I think the reality is for most companies and most brands that having an omni-channel approach is the best way, because it allows you to get in front of more customers without having to only acquire customers online, which has gotten far more competitive and is far more expensive than it was 10 to 12 years ago, even 5 years ago.
Yeah, and privacy rules changing, making it more complicated or difficult, right?
Yeah, the new iOS update, and ultimately it's good for the consumer, but it does make it challenging to acquire and grow a customer base.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about wholesale, and I've had this conversation. I've lived it myself, and talked to others like you. Storytelling is such a big part of your business, and the story that you create about your products. Does it worry you, when you're dealing with wholesale? Maybe it's not such a big deal because it's only 15%, but when you're selling wholesale, it's kind of harder to manage the storytell through somebody else selling your product. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely worry about that a lot. And I think that's why we're so selective about who we choose to work with. Because, for all of the stores that don't take great care of their customers and don't work hard to make, to try and create the same customer experience that we work so hard for, there are companies like Nordstrom, which are known for having great customer service, great return management solutions, kind of have this attitude of hugging your customer. I think the best way to guard against it is to not sign up for an account you don't believe has that same level of values. We recently, or about a year ago, turned down a $12 million opportunity because we did not believe that it was the right thing for our brand, our position, or for how we would be communicating with a customer. And that was really, really hard, because those are real dollars and you're growing and you're trying to grow an audience, but it's something that we believe very strongly in.
Yeah, you talk about your perception in the market, and also corporate culture. I've heard you do some other shows, and you talk about Rhone is committed to the committed. Maybe talk about that a bit.
I think part of what we wanted to do is we wanted to build a brand that would resonate with certain people and with our core customer base. And for me, one of the things that my parents really emphasized to us all the time was this idea of like just being all in what you do. If you're going to do it the right way. And we know that it's an interesting time to be a guy in human history. Every single year and day, there are stories of men who have behaved really poorly, and these guys deserve to be brought to justice and to light. And I think it's very, very positive. But in the same breath, we know that there are good men who do good things, who are committed to their jobs, who are committed to their families, and who are committed to their communities and doing the right thing. It's become cliche now, but the idea of playing hard and working hard and kind of just living all in, that line, by the way, comes from my brother Ben, who's our creative director. And it's just something that really resonates with me, is this idea of like, you're committed to living, to living well, and to just being all in, to take care of your body, to take care of your job, to take care of, I can imagine for you, Mark, like the world didn't need another podcast, right? But you decided to go and do it, and you work hard at it, and you're preparing for it. And I got the materials and the questions, and you are all in on it. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to take that level of risk. And we just felt like every single activewear brand was focused almost entirely on physical performance. Whereas we felt like that is one part of who we are. And it's not even the most important part. It's kind of everything else in our life that we wanted to build a brand that would resonate with people on.
Yeah, you also, there was another line that also resonated with me along the same, concept. You want kindness and good people. And, you just don't hear about that a lot anymore. That is commendable. We've obviously talked about COVID a little bit, at the beginning. We've been at this now 15 months. I'm sure there's a lot of things that you did differently at the very beginning when this started, some of which I'm imagining worked really well and will continue as part of the fabric of running your business. Can you talk about a few of those things, perhaps?
I mean, I think the first and most important thing that we did is we really focused on shoring up our team and making sure that they were taken care of, and that they knew that we were gonna work through this, and we were gonna be really committed. It was interesting. We asked this. We sent out this survey quarterly called the Q12 survey, and it's 12 questions. It's just a check-in with our team. We kind of have very high marks on kind of employee satisfaction, and we have high targets for those marks. And what was interesting is, like many companies in those early days, we actually cut salaries. I mean, I cut my salary really dramatically, and almost everybody took at least a 10% pay cut. Some people took more than that. And in that process, what we had is higher scores, higher performance of employee satisfaction while taking a pay cut, which is something that I think I was really, really grateful for. So that was kind of the first and most important thing. The second thing that I think we did that was helpful is we really try and get inside the mind of our customers, because they are the lifeblood of everything that we do. And I don't know if you remember this, but at the beginning of the pandemic, any brand that you had spent more than 5 minutes with and they had your email was sending you an email of like, here's how we're handling COVID-19. The cynic in me was like, okay, that's great. I'm glad that you are sending me an email to tell me that you're closing your stores. You're kind of like patting yourself on the back for how you've handled this. But I don't really need to know that. And that doesn't necessarily make me think more highly of you as a brand, because that's an expectation at this point. You should be taking care of your teams and your customers. And I got some internal pressure to be like, hey, everybody's sending this email. We have to send this email. And I remember thinking, but do you want another one of those emails? Like, do you want another one of those emails? And then I just challenged our team. I was like, what is the COVID email that you want to get? And like in 2 hours, we had brainstormed this, like, here's some recipes of things that you can make with stuff that's already in your kitchen so you don't have to go shopping. Here's great streaming shows that you can watch now that you in theory have more time to be watching it. Here's 30 days worth of at-home workouts that you can do. We sent it out and the subject line was not another COVID-19 email. And at the very top it said, if you're interested to know how we're taking care of our team and how we're managing through the pandemic, you can click here. I'm going to take you to a site where there was information on all the stuff that people were sending out. It's like, but this email isn't about us. It's about you and how you're feeling right now and what concern and how you're going to handle yourself for what we thought was going to be like a couple of weeks. We've never, ever received a response like we did to that email, because it was just like, thank you for thinking about me instead of thinking about yourselves. And I think that that's something that we've really tried hard to continue to focus on.
You do a lot on your site. We talked about storytelling, a lot of content under something called The Pursuit. How did that start? I've been through it. I'm a follower. I'm a customer. There's a lot of effort that's going into that.
Yeah, I give my brother Ben and our editor Jenny all the credit for that. It just goes back to this premise of, if a brand is a relationship, and I think that it is, then what kind of a relationship do we want to be for the customer? So many times the interaction is about what the customer can do for us. You can come buy this new stuff that we just released, and you can come continue to support us, and here's a discount, and it's like, that just is, if you think about that with any friend that you might have, if you had that kind of relationship, you wouldn't be friends with that person for very long. We really try and challenge ourselves. What can we do to help our customer? What are they worried about? What are they stressed about? What do they want to read about? And not to have that editorial be influenced by a need to sell advertising dollars, which every other media company is heavily, like, we have a core business and our core business covers the ability for us to do this. Let's just offer great content that we think is highly relevant to our customer base. And if we do that, that has all these net benefits. But the main thing is that people understand more who we are as a brand and a desire to associate with it by how we communicate with them. And we're not perfect, but I think we've made great strides there, and it's really helped us in a lot of ways.
You started a meeting early on. I think you talked about the Palms meeting. I thought that was interesting. What was that?
For people in the apparel industry, this meeting generally exists, but as a startup, we were kind of like figuring everything out on our own. So POM stands for Product Operations, Marketing, and Support. And what we were trying to do is we were trying to really like align all of our teams internally in a way that we could react as the customer's life was changing, because every single week it felt like there was a new crisis or a new challenge that was impacting the way people were living, and our marketing needed to adjust, our voice needed to be sensitive to situations going on, and our product needed to make sure that it was meeting the demands of what the customers were facing. That meeting has continued to evolve. It's my favorite meeting of the week. I absolutely love it. I do far less talking than I used to because we have much smarter people than I. And every week, what I do is I actually get on a treadmill. I watch it and I listen and I participate, and I'm like just zeroed in on that meeting because it's the meeting that drives the whole business. But it's something we weren't doing pre-pandemic.
Let me ask you one really tactical question. And,
Sure.
sometimes in a podcast, it's hard to do it, but, and it comes up in a lot of the marketing conversations, and it's the whole issue around media mix and attribution and, really how you guys think about where you're going to spend your next marketing dollar. How
Yeah.
does that conversation happen internally?
We've started to focus a lot more on kind of trying to get the attribution right. And so from a tactical level, every time you spend a dollar in any advertising medium, the method by which you advertise, let's say that it's Facebook, will come back to you and tell you how effective that dollar was. And that's generally what attribution is about. This dollar generated this result, or this sale was generated by this advertising medium. But the truth is that advertising is really complex. You might see an ad on Facebook, but then Google Rhone and click through Google. Well, who gets the credit for that? Is it Facebook or is it Google? Is it both? Or maybe you're watching CNN and one of our TV ads show up and you end up going directly to the site. Who gets the credit for that? Where's the attribution on that? So we've built an internal attribution model based on now years of spending that helps us better calculate the effectiveness of these channels. And this isn't news for you, Mark, but for anybody listening, you have your marketing funnel, right? And it works like anything in life. You've got the top of funnel. These are people who show level of interest. The middle of the funnel, people that have maybe added an item to the cart. And then the bottom of the funnel, that where you're like kind of getting people all the way through to conversion. And you need to do two things. You need to get more people in the funnel, and you need to widen the funnel so that the people that come through actually come all the way down. And so on the attribution side, we use a tool called Rockerbox that we really like. And that tool helps us in kind of our attribution modeling. And we're kind of always measuring, checking. But we also try not to get overly hung up on the metrics, because what we have found is, even in this world where we live in, where everybody's like start with the data, end with the data will lie to you so much. Even as we zero in on our attribution modeling, like it's imperfect. One of the mistakes that we made is we started hyper focusing on channels where we had a clear return on ad spend we felt was kind of positive for the business, and we were neglecting areas where it was much harder to drive attribution that were more top of funnel activities. But if you starve the top of the funnel and you're only focused on mid and lower funnel, you might have this really efficient funnel, but eventually people aren't coming through the top. We have meetings, we have tools, we certainly spend a lot of time on it, but it's part art, it's part science. And I think there are times that we're great at it and times where I'm like, we got a lot of work to do.
Now, I think you explained it perfectly, and it's the single biggest issue that I think that I hear people talking about is, where do I spend that, that next dollar? It's a tough decision, and business is starving the top of funnel, and then waking up one day and saying, "Geez, why don't we have more, brand traffic? Why don't we have more ability to retarget?" We're heading up to the end of the show. I could sit here and talk to you all day because it's really interesting stuff that you guys are doing. We do this 2-minute drill.
We used to run the 2-minute drill in football all the time. So
yeah, 1 or 2 word answers. A brand that you admire or that inspires you.
Rivian.
Oh, I don't know that brand.
A new electric car company that is getting their first models out this summer. But I love everything about the brand. I love what they stand for. I love how they communicate to their customer.
Awesome. Great. Favorite app on your phone?
Well, this is very personal, but it's called Dexcom. I'm type 1 diabetic, and that measures my blood sugar. So it's pretty important to me.
The last website other than Amazon and Rhone that you shopped from?
Clean Simple Eats, which is a company I'm on the board of, but they make, I think, the best protein powder on the market. And I just bought some yesterday, so I'm obsessed with it.
Okay. Something that you're not good at, but that you wish that you were?
Just enjoying the present. I feel like I'm always worried about the future and focused on the future, and probably enjoying the present.
I'm guessing this next one's going to be really easy for you. A charitable organization that you're passionate about.
Beyond Type 1, which I've now been involved with for 3 years, and I just it's an amazing organization with great people.
If you had one superpower, what would it be?
The ability to go back and revisit and re-experience moments in my life.
And last one, other than family, what's your most prized possession?
Does this exclude animals too?
No. Hey, if it's an animal.
I love our puppy. We've got a beautiful golden named Mia that is like everybody in the family loves her. So I'd have to say Mia outside of family.
Okay.
Which she kind of is family. So that's almost cheating.
Nate, let people know that are listening where they could reach out to you on social media if they'd like to.
I'm active on LinkedIn and Instagram, and it's just Nate Checketts on both.
Okay, Nate, this was really interesting. I want all my listeners to know, I've bought and worn Rhone product. It's great. The fabrications are great. It wears well. It's fairly priced. Really great brand. They're doing some great things. And Nate, I really appreciate you spending the time and being so open about your business.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
That's it. Today's game ball goes to Nate Checketts for coming on the Marketing Playbook. To me, today's 3 game-winning marketing plays were as follows. Number 1, sometimes you just have to follow your heart. We heard Nate speak a few times about decisions that he made earlier in his life that might not have been the most pragmatic choices. He looked at his options and chose the one where he felt would be most fulfilled. It might not always work out as expected, but at least you can say that you pursued a dream. Number 2, be all in. Once you choose a job or a task, give it your all. There might be others relying on you, so you can always make sure to give the best possible effort that you can. And number 3, the day-to-day tactics matter, and so do the details. Although not a new idea, Nate spoke about the POMS meeting that came out of the need to get the team together while all working remotely during the early days of COVID. That daily stand-up continues today and gives each member of the management team the opportunity to express what they're working on and where they might need help from others on the team. Thank you, Playbook marketers, for listening to another episode. If you want to check out more pages of the Marketing Playbook, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast spot and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter at DetailsInteract and learn more at detailsinteractive.com. Until next time, the devil is in the details.